Dr. Ruth Dotton here. I'm a board-certified adult psychiatrist who focuses on implementing lifestyle and metabolic interventions to get at the root causes of mental health. Now, I know most people have an idea of what lifestyle interventions are, but what are metabolic interventions? So that's where metabolic psychiatry comes in. Metabolic psychiatry is a relatively new field that focuses on the intersection between metabolic health and mental health. So it explores how metabolic dysfunction, so things like insulin resistance and inflammation, can contribute to mental illness. And by how addressing this metabolic dysfunction, we can improve mental health. But first, let's take a step back and ask, what even is metabolism? So metabolism is essentially the process by which your body takes in and processes nutrients, aka food, to create energy and perform all the functions that your cell needs to grow and to thrive. Metabolism is extremely complex, but suffice it to say that when there is metabolic dysfunction, our cells can no longer thrive. And while they may make adjustments to allow us to survive, these adaptations can ultimately lead to ongoing and worsening health problems. So one example is insulin resistance. This develops over time in response to repeated glucose spikes from meals that consist of refined carbohydrates and sugars. So this is things like sweets, pasta, cereals, bread. So our body adjusts to that glucose load by producing more and more insulin to be able to process all that glucose that it's receiving, until eventually the pancreas cells, which make all that insulin, essentially burn out. And then your body can no longer process all of that glucose. And so that's when you develop diabetes and your glucose levels start to be high, so your sugar levels. And another example is inflammation, right? So inflammation is a normal and necessary part of your body's response to injury, stress, or other stimuli. But it does divert your body's resources from doing other important and necessary processes. And over time, if there's chronic inflammation, it can lead to tissue damage, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disease, and a whole host of other chronic health problems. So individuals who have metabolic syndrome, you may have heard this term. So that is the syndrome that consists of people who have large waist circumference, insulin resistance, abnormal cholesterol, and high blood pressure. They're suffering from metabolic dysfunction. And in America, this is 93% of adults. So this is a big problem. And you can see why the mental health issues that we have in America are growing and becoming a bigger and bigger problem every year. So now, where does this connection between mental health come in to our metabolic health? Well, metabolic dysfunction affects each of our organs and cell types differently. So in the heart, it causes cardiovascular disease. In the liver, it can cause fatty liver disease. In the pancreas, we see that it leads to diabetes. In the brain, it's going to cause neurologic and psychiatric disorders, things like Alzheimer's disease, seizures, migraines, depression. And so we know that there's this strong association between mental health disorders like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, depression, and metabolic dysfunction, and that there's a strong association between all of these disease states that we've said. So, all of the disease states that are associated with metabolic dysfunction. So cardiovascular disease, depression, diabetes, all of these things, studies show that they all cluster together. So this concept is described really beautifully and in great detail in Dr. Christopher Palmer's 2022 book, Brain Energy. And I highly recommend that you read that if you're at all interested in this stuff. So in metabolic psychiatry, we focus on interventions that optimize our metabolic functioning, so including inflammation, energy pathways, and insulin resistance. So this can be done through things like dietary interventions, like ketogenic therapy or intermittent fasting, correction of underlying hormonal abnormalities, regulation of circadian rhythms, integration of regular exercise, stress management, elimination of toxins, and many other interventions. So we're going to explore these interventions in more detail in future videos, but I'm not going to dive into that right now. So if you're at all interested in learning more about metabolic psychiatry, I highly recommend Dr. Christopher Palmer's book, like I mentioned before. Also, Dr. Georgia Eads' book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. And Metabolic Mind is another phenomenal resource. They have tons of information, informational videos, and stories with people with their lived experience of implementing these interventions and the difference that it's made in their lives. So I'll include a link to these resources in the description below. So I hope that this was helpful information about metabolic psychiatry and a good introduction. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you in the next one.